The small town of Hollow Creek was nestled deep in the New England countryside, a place where time seemed to move slower, measured by the changing seasons. The town was a picturesque vision of rural America, with its old houses and quaint village charm, where every corner seemed to tell a story of days gone by. The wind would often whisper through the trees, carrying with it secrets and stories from the past, rustling the leaves in a symphony of nature's own making. Life there was simple, peaceful, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. The townsfolk went about their daily routines with a sense of calm and contentment, finding joy in the small, everyday moments. Yet, beneath the surface of tranquility, a current of unease ran through the town, a shared fear passed down through generations, the legend of Longhorse. This legend was more than just a story. It was a part of the town's very fabric, woven into the lives of its residents. The elders spoke of a creature of the night, a harbinger of misfortune, a spectral steed with an unnaturally long neck that stretched towards the heavens. They would gather around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, recounting the eerie tales with a mix of fear and reverence. Its face was skeletal, a horrifying grin etched onto its bony visage, and its mane billowed like smoke, a ghostly plume against the moonlit sky. The image of Longhorse was enough to send shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to listen. It was said that to see Longhorse was to be touched by death itself, a warning of impending doom. The mere mention of its name would cause a hush to fall over any gathering, as if speaking it aloud might summon the creature. Most dismissed the stories as mere folklore, tales told to frighten children and add a touch of the macabre to the long winter nights. They would laugh and shake their heads, convinced that such things were nothing more than figments of an overactive imagination. But some, those who had lived in Hollow Creek long enough to witness the ebb and flow of life and death, knew better than to tempt fate. They had seen too much, experienced too many unexplained events to simply dismiss the legend as a mere story. They kept the legend alive, a cautionary tale whispered around crackling fires, a reminder that even in the most peaceful of places, darkness lurked. These stories served as a warning, a way to keep the younger generations aware of the unseen dangers that might be lurking in the shadows. The fall of 1974 arrived in Hollow Creek like any other, awash in the vibrant hues of crimson and gold as the leaves turned and the air grew crisp. The town was a canvas of autumnal beauty, with every tree and leaf adding to the picturesque scene. It seemed like a season like any other, yet a sense of foreboding lingered in the air, a subtle shift that went unnoticed by most, save for those who remembered the legend of Longhorse. The older residents could feel it in their bones, a chill that went beyond the crisp autumn air. And for one young woman named Margaret, the legend was about to become a terrifying reality. She had always been skeptical of the old tales, but as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, waiting in the shadows. Margaret had lived in Hollow Creek her entire life, her childhood filled with stories of Longhorse, tales that both fascinated and terrified her. She, like many others, had dismissed them as mere superstition, the ramblings of old folks trying to hold on to the past. Yet deep down, a seed of doubt remained, planted by the fear in her grandmother's eyes as she recounted the legend. The air was unusually cold for early autumn that year, a biting wind whipping through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain and decaying leaves. It was the kind of night that sent shivers down your spine, a night where shadows seemed to dance, and the silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves underfoot.
I was walking home from my evening shift at the local diner, my breath misting in the cold air. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, and the houses I passed were dark, their occupants already settled in for the night. A sense of unease settled over me, a feeling that I was being watched. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The wind seemed to pick up, swirling around me like a living thing, whispering my name in hushed tones. It was foolish, I knew, to let my imagination run wild, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong.
As she rounded a bend in the road, she saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the street, silhouetted against the pale glow of the moon. It was tall and slender, with an unnaturally long neck that stretched towards the sky. Fear, cold and primal, gripped her heart, stopping her dead in her tracks. Margaret stood frozen in place, her breath catching in her throat. The night was eerily silent, the kind of silence that makes every small sound seem amplified. She could hear her own heartbeat, a rapid drum in her chest, as she tried to process the sight before her. The figure remained motionless, its long neck swaying slightly in the wind as if it were alive. The moonlight cast an otherworldly glow on its form, making it look even more surreal and terrifying. Her mind, still struggling to make sense of what her eyes were seeing, tried to rationalize the impossible. She blinked several times, hoping that the figure would disappear, but it remained, a haunting presence in the night. Perhaps it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the old oak tree at the edge of town. She had heard stories of shadows playing tricks on the eyes, especially on nights like this when the moon was full and bright. But as she stared, her eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness, she realized with growing horror that this was no shadow. The figure was too solid, too real to be a mere illusion.
It was Longhorse, just as my grandmother had described it. A creature from the old tales that had been passed down through generations. Every terrifying detail etched into my memory. The stories had always seemed like just that, stories. But now, faced with the reality of it, I felt a chill run down my spine. The skeletal face, frozen in a grotesque grin, was exactly as my grandmother had described. Its hollow eyes seemed to hold a malevolent intelligence, as if it knew the fear it was causing. The long flowing mane of smoke that billowed around its head like a shroud added to its eerie presence. It moved as if it had a life of its own, swirling and twisting in the night air. Terror, raw and consuming, surged through my veins. I felt paralyzed, unable to move or even think clearly. The stories had never mentioned this overwhelming sense of dread. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. It was as if the very air around me had thickened, trapping me in place.
She watched in horrified fascination as Longhorse turned its head towards her, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment, its empty sockets seeming to bore into her very soul. She felt exposed, as if the creature could see every fear, every secret she had ever held. For what felt like an eternity, they stood there, locked in a silent standoff, the world around them forgotten. The only thing that existed was the terror and the creature that caused it. Margaret paralyzed by fear, Longhorse a terrifying specter bathed in the pale moonlight. The contrast between the serene moonlight and the horrifying figure made the scene even more surreal. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the creature turned and vanished into the night, its form dissolving into the shadows, melting into the shadows, as if it had never been. The night seemed to swallow it whole, leaving no trace of its presence. Margaret was left standing alone in the darkness, her heart pounding in her chest, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. The image of Longhorse seared into her mind. She knew she would never forget the sight of it, the way it had looked at her. The wind whipped around her, no longer a playful breeze but a mournful wail that seemed to echo the creature's silent scream. It was as if the very night was mourning the encounter. She knew then, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that what she had seen was no mere figment of her imagination. The stories were true, and the creature was real. Longhorse was real, and its presence in Hollow Creek could only mean one thing: trouble was coming. The town had always been quiet, but now, with the creature's appearance, she feared that peace was about to be shattered. The encounter left Margaret shaken to her core. She had never experienced such a profound sense of dread before. The image of Longhorse, its skeletal face and empty eyes, haunted her every waking moment. It was as if the creature had imprinted itself on her mind, an indelible mark of terror. Sleep offered no escape, for her dreams were plagued by nightmares of the creature chasing her through the twisting streets of Hollow Creek. Each night, the scenes grew more vivid, more terrifying, as if Longhorse was drawing closer with every passing hour, its mournful cries echoing in her ears, a sound that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of her soul, leaving her trembling and breathless.
I tried to tell my friends and family about what I had seen, hoping they would understand and offer some comfort. But their reactions were met with skepticism and amusement. They laughed it off, treating it as nothing more than a fanciful tale. They dismissed my story as a product of stress or an overactive imagination, not realizing the depth of my fear. After all, Longhorse was just a legend, a story told to frighten children, a myth that had no place in the rational world of adults. No one had seen the creature in decades, not since the Great Hurricane of '38, when the town was nearly wiped off the map. And even then, the stories were shrouded in doubt, passed down through generations as mere whispers of a forgotten past. My warnings were met with shrugs and knowing smiles, as if I were recounting an old wives' tale. They couldn't see the truth behind my words, the genuine terror that gripped me.
"Margaret, you've always been an imaginative one," they'd say, patting her hand condescendingly. Their patronizing tone only deepened her sense of isolation. "Don't let those old wives' tales get to you," they would add, their laughter ringing in her ears. But their words did little to ease her growing anxiety. The fear gnawed at her, a constant presence that she couldn't shake. She knew what she had seen, and the disbelief of others only served to amplify her fear. It was as if she were living in a different reality, one where the impossible was all too real. The weight of her secret knowledge pressed down on her, isolating her from the very people she was trying to warn. She felt like a stranger in her own town. The townsfolk continued their lives, oblivious to the danger she was certain lurked just beneath the surface of their peaceful existence. They went about their days, unaware of the shadow that loomed over them. Each passing day heightened her anxiety, the fear a constant knot in her stomach. She could feel it tightening, a physical manifestation of her dread. Margaret felt a profound sense of helplessness wash over her. She was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up or find solace. She was trapped in a nightmare, burdened with a terrible truth that no one would believe. The legend of Longhorse, once a mere ghost story, had become her terrifying reality. The legend of Longhorse, once a mere ghost story, had become her terrifying reality, and she was alone in her dread. The creature's silent warning echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the impending doom she felt powerless to prevent. The creature's silent warning echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the impending doom she felt powerless to prevent. She knew that the danger was real, and that it was only a matter of time before it revealed itself to the rest of the town.